WCW's forgotten gimmicks. We all remember the Dungeon of Doom, we all remember Seven, and we all remember the Kiss Demon. But what about the other guys who maybe didn't get featured all that much on Monday nights, or better yet, what about the guys who didn't appear on Nitro at all? This is what we're looking at today, some of the gimmick characters in WCW who you'd only find on the B shows, shows that directly competed against infomercials for the Thigh Master or the Psychic Raiders network. We're going to begin with a few gimmicks based on law enforcement and the military, so let's get started and let's see how many of these characters you remember. Cobra was a short-lived character that was introduced in the summer of 1995. Played by Jeff Farmer, who we had all come to know and love as the fake Sting, Cobra's backstory was rooted in military betrayal. You see, during the Gulf War, Sergeant Craig Pittman abandoned Cobra in the jungle, and Craig went back to camp to report Cobra as AWOL, which, you know, is a pretty bold claim, considering the Gulf War took place in a desert, meaning Cobra must have been hiding behind a very specific bush for about 3 weeks. Cobra, feeling this deep betrayal, took it upon himself to learn how to wrestle so he could enter WCW and get revenge on his former sergeant. Forget a court-martial, Cobra was going to subject Sergeant Craig Pittman to a wristlock on a syndicated WCW B show. I mean, this does feel like a bit of a stretch, doesn't it? If you wanted to get revenge on someone leaving you in the jungle, surely you just show up at their door and say, "Hey dickhead, thanks for leaving me to fight tigers, monkeys and poison dart frogs. It's time for a little payback." As mentioned, Jeff Farmer would soon ditch the Cobra gimmick and he'd go on to become Sting's doppelganger. Craig Pittman would wrestle as an even lower mid-carder once his work with Cobra had wrapped up. So in a way, I guess Cobra did get his revenge. Cobra was also responsible for ending Sergeant Craig Pittman's glorious win streak when he defeated him on the September 23rd episode of WCW Saturday Night. Nothing screams ultimate closure like a 3 count on the mothership. So joke's on you, Craig. That'll teach you for leaving your comrades in the jungle. State Patrol consisted of Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker and Lieutenant James Earlwright. These Southern State Troopers were actually considered quite a reliable undercard heel tag team who did a good job of making their opponents look better. Nothing about State Patrol was remotely charismatic though. They were no-nonsense law enforcers who wrestled typical old-school heel matches, which, to be fair, drew enough heat to keep them on TV for a while. But the gimmick had no legs at all. Buddy Lee Parker would go on to become a leprechaun, which is the natural career progression for a state trooper. He had also become the head honcho of WCW's power plant, where his harsh training methods received both criticism and praise depending on who you ask. And as for Lieutenant James Earlwright, real name Dale Vesey, he did absolutely nothing of note once State Patrol was off TV. Quick bit of trivia for you though, Lieutenant James of State Patrol got eliminated from the 1995 World War III match by none other than Cobra, and to get revenge, the Lieutenant pulled Cobra out of the ring while also eliminating Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker. So neither member of State Patrol won the 3-ring battle royal, but by God, they made sure the jungle-dwelling fake Sting didn't either. The Gambler was an enhancement guy that got a decent amount of TV time on WCW B shows. Real name Jeff Gann, though sometimes billed as Jeff Gambler. He had come to the ring holding a deck of cards because, I don't know, he really liked gambling. Nothing strikes fear into the heart of a 300-pound powerhouse quite like a man threatening to hit you with the 4 of diamonds. I mean, think about this for a while. What appeal does a wrestling gambler really have? What was his finishing move? Getting evicted? It's just so random. Like a hockey player who likes cooking in the kitchen, or a shop assistant who plays video games. I just fail to see the correlation here and how a gambler is supposed to translate into a successful pro wrestling character. That being said, old Jeff Gann wasn't a successful pro wrestling character, so I guess that proves it then. Our card-playing friend was used to make other people look good. He'd lose just as much in the ring as he did at the slot machines, though he does have one very specific claim to fame. He took on Glacier in Old Frosty Ball's first ever match. After all that build-up for the Glacier character, and after all the delays when introducing Glacier to WCW audiences, it was the Gambler who stepped up to take him on. He lost of course, but that's to be expected. WCW put their expensive Mortal Kombat clone in the ring with a man who looked like he'd sell you a dodgy VCR just so he could get some shrapnel to burn at the casino. Jim Herd wanted to attract young viewers to WCW, so he signed Pacific Northwest sensation Art Barr. In Portland, Barr was successful wrestling as Beetlejuice, but because WCW were a bit smarter when it came to copyright infringement, he was renamed the Juicer. The Juicer was popular with the kiddos, getting them in on the act during his entrances and impressing them with his high-flying ring style. He also had a thing for baby powder, it seems, but for sure, if you watched WCW during this time period, then you would remember him. He'd then go on to Mexico, where he became even more successful when teaming up with Eddie Guerrero while calling himself the Love Machine. But beneath all this was a really dark side to Art Barr. Even before he signed with WCW, he pled guilty to SA, yet WCW still hired him. It was also well documented that Barr had serious issues with drugs. So while a lot of people praised Art Barr for his work, such as Chris Jericho, Conan and the late Eddie Guerrero, and while Dave Meltzer's on record is saying Art Barr changed Lucha Libre forever alongside Guerrero, his legacy is tarnished and therefore he basically isn't spoken about at all in modern times. Though a move Art Barr created is still used today, a move that was named after him when Two Cold Scorpio said he looked like a frog when delivering the move. That move being the Frog Splash. As mentioned, WCW hired Art Barr in 1999 despite his SA conviction being public knowledge in Oregon. Oregon press coverage followed him to WCW, and anonymous sources sent copies of the negative press to newspapers in cities where WCW was scheduled to appear. This in turn created bad publicity around World Championship Wrestling, pushing Barr as a child-friendly character. So while WCW initially stood by Art Barr, they had to eventually cut ties with him due to the backlash. Debuting in August 1991, the Patriots were a clean-cut babyface tag team that consisted of Firebreaker Chip and Todd Champion. With a name like Todd Champion, you just know he was going to be really good. These two were elite members of the fictional WCW Special Forces team. They capitalized on the patriotic sentiment of America after the Gulf War, and they got fast-tracked to the top of the tag team division in order to feud with the fabulous Freebirds. They shocked everyone when they defeated the Birds while capturing the WCW US Tag Team Championships, though they'd only hold on to the belts for a month before dropping them to the Young Pistols, Steve Armstrong and Tracy Smothers, who I also could have included in this video. WCW's Patriots were originally part of a larger American Patriots concept, apparently. It was reported that a planned 4-man group was tied to a TBS cartoon idea. The reported original lineup was Todd Champion as a military private, Curtis Thompson as a fireman, Bill Kazmaier as a policeman, and Pez Waitley as a garbage man. Jim Herd didn't just want a wrestling faction, instead he wanted to book the village people. The idea was reduced to just Todd Champion and Firebreaker Chip though, so it's okay. Curtis Thompson said he was offered an astronaut gimmick before becoming Firebreaker Chip, which would have been absolutely spectacular, I'm sure you'd agree. The zero gravity elbow drop. It really does have Jim Herd written all over it. Anyway, the Patriots team ended up disbanding. The Special Forces weren't all that special, though they did make a comeback in December 1997 when they had a dark match on Nitro. The match did not lead to a new WCW contract. Yeah, it must have been great making your grand return in front of a half-empty arena while the fans are still in line buying hot dogs. Matt Wise was a physically imposing, muscular graduate of the WCW power plant who made his official debut in late 1997 under the name Horshu. Those who follow WCW very closely may have recognised this guy as one of the losers who competed in Roddy Piper's ill-fated gauntlet match in the run-up to Uncensored 97, but turns out Matt was given a proper chance by World Championship Wrestling to actually have a few matches, and by proper chance, I mean WCW strapped a rocket to him that was entirely powered by a terrible haircut and sheer desperation. The gimmick was designed entirely around Matt's hairstyle. His entire head was shaved bald except for a thick strip of blonde hair on top, shaped like a giant horseshoe. Not the typical horseshoe haircut you think of, this one was like on the top of his head. It's the only haircut in human history that actually manages to look both bald and overgrown at the exact same time. He also flexed his arms into a horseshoe shape to taunt his opponents, and he said, my god, he said, "There's no business like shoe business." We can only assume the follow-up line he had prepared was, "This shoe was made for walking," or "I'm a shoe-in for the championship." Yeah, I'm sorry. Shockingly, the gimmick did not survive the corporate restructuring of WCW's late 90s undercard, though Wise's physical size and conditioning eventually earned him a contract with WWE. During the Ruthless Aggression era, Matt was introduced on the SmackDown brand as Luther Reigns, and for sure, it's Luther Reigns who most people remember and not Horshu. Going from Horshu to Luther Reigns is perhaps the greatest witness protection program success story in the history of sports entertainment, though would it be safe to say that Luther Reigns is now a WWE forgotten character? No, give it a year or two and we'll come back to it. The Wrecking Crew was a powerhouse heel tag team introduced in late 1992, a team so devastatingly powerful that they managed to completely wreck their own momentum in less than 6 months. Consisting of Rage, Al Green, a long-time WCW utility man, and Fury, Mark Laurinaitis, brother of Road Warrior Animal and Super Creep Johnny Ace. So yeah, we've got the third most famous sibling in the Laurinaitis household. The duo was packaged as a destructive force intent on running roughshod on the WCW tag team undercard, but they came off as seriously generic. These boyos really did have their work cut out for them. They tried to tell us they were the next big tag team and every other tag team should watch out, but as expected they fizzled out and no one but idiots like me can remember them. They did get a win over Tom Zenk and Johnny Gunn at Clash of the Champions in January 93, but that's hardly a big achievement, is it? It's like the pro wrestling equivalent of beating Level 2 in Super Mario Bros. The Blackhearts were a gothic themed tag team that showed up in WCW in early 1993. The team consisted of David Heath, known here as Blackheart Apocalypse but much better known as Gangrel, and Tom Nash, here known as Blackheart Destruction but much better known as... I'll get back to you on that when the full 30-minute Wrestling Bios videos drops on the legendary Tom Nash. The Blackhearts only wrestled in WCW for 3 weeks before the boys were told to hit the bricks. 3 weeks. I mean, that's not a run, is it? It's a cameo, a trial subscription. They barely had time to unpack their bags, let alone find out where catering is. Interesting tidbit though, in an interview with Tom Nash conducted in 2014, Tom said he talked with Dave Meltzer and it was Dave who came up with the Blackhearts tag team. So thanks very much, Dirty Dave, your contributions are truly endless. The team originated out of Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling, and apparently the entrance masks were initially inspired by the Phantom of the Opera because Bruce Hart thought Phantom of the Opera was some seriously hot shit. Just picture the scene in the Hart House in Calgary. Stu Hart's in the dungeon stretching guys out until they cry, and up in the kitchen Bruce is listening to a cassette tape of Andrew Lloyd Webber while crying over a tragic love story, thinking to himself, yes, this is exactly what the wrestling business is missing. Steve DeSalvo was an internationally established powerhouse who had previously headlined territories as Strangler Steve DeSalvo in Stampede and Sadistic Steve Strong in Puerto Rico's World Wrestling Council. When WCW got a hold of him, they chose to discard his established identity and he became a mythical half-beast creature known as Minotaur, not to be confused with the WWF's Mantaur, although I'd like to believe this is where the WWF got the idea from. I'm sure they didn't, but one can dream. The fine folks at WCW looked at this proven powerhouse wrestler and they said, yeah, but what if you were a mythical cow instead? And poor Steve just replied, okay then. Though maybe he should have thought twice because the Minotaur experiment didn't even last a month. He worked his first match on the 10th of December 1990 against Keith Hart, but that match didn't air until the 19th of January 1991. Steve's last house show match was on the 18th of January, so that means Steve had already left WCW while his official true debut match aired on TV. Fans at home were watching him lock up with Keith Hart, completely unaware that Steve was probably already sitting on a couch at his own home, watching his own debut as an unemployed man. Though this is nothing out of the ordinary either. The nature of WCW's tape shows meant that some matches could air weeks or even months after they actually happened. Twin tag teams are nothing new in wrestling. The Harris brothers, the Bella twins, the Usos. But what about Power Company? Not the guys you phone up when you haven't paid your electricity bill, but the guys you phone up when you need tag team jobbers on your roster. Their gimmick names were Dave and Dean Power, their real names were Dave and Dean Liptak, and their pharmaceutical names were Roids McJection and Juicy Bustavein. These boyos could be found on the WCW B shows during mid-97 to mid-98, and they didn't win a single match while competing on WCW programming. They had not one but 2 handicap matches against the Giant, and they didn't learn from their initial mistakes at all. WCW's resident big man took care of Dave and Dean with ease. It's actually pretty incredible how generic these lads are. I mean, the Power Company, could we not have came up with something a little bit better? When you've got twins on your roster, you've always got a chance to do some creative stuff. And no, I don't mean the old switcheroo that the Harris brothers would pull off in practically every single one of their matches, but I don't know, use your imagination. The only thing the Power Company ever powered was the audience's collective decision to flip the channel and watch something else. Rick Thames and Sonny Trout made up the team of Southern Posse, and while Rick Thames isn't a great name, Sonny Trout is the stuff of absolute nightmares. Seriously, Sonny Trout sounds less like a scary pro wrestler and more like a cartoon fish who would give you side quests in a kid's PC game. These fine young gentlemen were pretty successful while working in the Tampa Independents, but as soon as they busted down the doors in WCW, they were immediately relegated to jobbers. They jobbed out quite a bit in singles action. The tag team division must have been in some desperate need of enhancement, so Ricky T and the Trout Boy got together to form the Southern Posse. The only posse I recognise though is the one from the mean streets of Connecticut. At least Pete Gas and Rodney look like they actively managed a trust fund. Rick and Sonny look like they weren't allowed to be within 30 feet of a school playground. These guys would end up becoming jobbers for the jobbers. They'd lose to the likes of High Voltage, Thunder and Lightning, and the Armstrongs. It's like enhancing the enhancement talent so they could go on to enhance the bigger stars of the industry, like a multi-level scam jobber pyramid scheme. That being said, the Southern Posse actually stayed in WCW for quite some time. They debuted in late 1993 and they lasted all the way until late 1997. That's actually quite remarkable when you think about it. Ricky Thames also took little breaks every now and then to job out the WWF guys, only to come right back to WCW to commence his enhancement duties. The Troutmaster also went to WWF for a few weeks in 1995 to get beaten up by the likes of Doink, Lex Luger and Razor Ramon, only to come crawling back to World Championship Wrestling. Old Sonny Boy didn't jump ship for a bigger push, he jumped ship because he loved being humiliated in 2 different time zones. But you know what, fair dues for keeping employment for so long. I can't imagine their brown envelopes were falling apart thanks to all the cold hard cash they were receiving every week, but work is work. Respect the hustle. Yeah, these guys probably aren't forgotten, but they still kinda fit into the theme of this video. Men at Work consisted of Chris Kanyon and Mark Starr. I'm sure you all know who Chris Kanyon is, and if you don't, we can't be friends anymore. But Mark Starr is quite an oddity. He actually had a decent career before showing up in the USA big leagues. He wrestled in the CWA, FMW and all around Japan, where he also collected a few championship belts. But when he wrestled singles in both WWF and WCW, he became a jobber, regularly appearing in pay-per-view dark matches in the latter, which is wrestling's way of saying, technically you were on the show, but so was the ring crew. Mark's also pretty well known for a match he had against Rick Rude on WCW Saturday Night in 1994, a match that got very stiff and very one-sided, with Rude almost knocking the Star Man out with a single punch, but anyway. Mark and Kanyon got together to become the Men at Work, construction workers who love to wrestle. Hard hats, flannels, jeans, and more stuff you'd expect from construction workers, such as measuring up, ensuring the turnbuckles were secure, or maybe not secure, and wasting time on the job by taking coffee breaks. Eventually, the Men at Work got a new member, and that new member was Mr. Mike Wiener. Yeah, this guy who I talked about in the forgotten WCW Nitro Soldiers video I put together. The Men at Work were one of those teams that got wins here and there, but effectively they became job guys. Thankfully, Chris went on to have much better luck when he began wrestling as Mortis. Funny how being a Mortal Kombat rip-off character turned out to be a more dignified career move. But Mike and Mark, they didn't have as much luck. Maybe these two should have gotten together to form the Star Wiener team. I'm sorry. For sure, many, if not most of these gimmicks were silly, and it's no wonder the casual wrestling fans wouldn't have a clue who half these people are. But in a way, it also shows us how wrestling used to be a lot more risky and a lot more goofy. Goofy in a good way. Nowadays, when it comes to characters, wrestling companies play it way too safe. Everyone's a badass now, everyone has to be serious, and if someone does come along who's really out there in terms of his character, they're presented in a way that the man behind the gimmick knows it's all over the top. Like, the joke's supposed to be that we all know how ridiculous it is. Us fans are equally to blame though. If someone came along to Monday Night Raw and said he was out for revenge after being left to fend for himself in the jungle, you best believe half the world's population would jump onto social media to complain about it. So in a way, it's actually us who don't allow these kind of characters to appear on TV anymore. Wrestling companies just cater to what we now find acceptable. But that'll do it for today, everyone. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed watching this one, do hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. I would appreciate it greatly. Until next time, please take care.